Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
As a public service announcement, I've got to tell you that not every story I do which involves the police arresting somebody, it's not always the police doing something wrong. Sometimes they arrest people correctly based on someone else's mistake. And that's the story here. Chris, James, and Cliff all sent this. Kaylee Johnson wrote it for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. An Arizona man spent 17 days in jail for a crime he did not commit, and he blames American Airlines. American Airlines. The man's life was changed after he spent 17 days in a New Mexico jail because American Airlines wrongfully accused and identified him to police as a shoplifter at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. The man's filed a lawsuit. He's laid out these details in that complaint. He was boarding a flight at DFW in May of 2020. More than a year later, he was on vacation in New Mexico when he was arrested on warrants he did not know existed for a crime he did not commit, and actually for a crime he didn't even know about. So for more than 2 weeks, he sat in a county jail during the height of the COVID pandemic in grossly unsanitary conditions, according to the lawsuit. He said they wouldn't even tell him what he'd been arrested for until he'd been released. So he spent 17 days in jail, and they wouldn't tell him what he'd been arrested for. His attorney said, "I've never heard of this fact pattern in my life or my career. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone." Now, the events began in May of 2020 when someone else shoplifted from a store inside the airport. Surveillance cameras caught the suspect boarding a flight headed to Reno. American Airlines reported the theft to the airport police, which ordered the airline to send over the footage of the people boarding the plane and a passenger manifest showing everyone who's on the flight. Instead, and this is according to the lawsuit, American Airlines departed from its established procedures and sent police a single passenger's information, and that is this man's. So when the police said, well, we'll investigate, send us over the passenger manifest and the images of everyone getting on board, they said, oh no, here's your guy. Here's your guy. An American Airlines spokesperson could not immediately be reached for comment. The man had been on the flight. He actually had been on the flight as a layover on a trip from Flagstaff to Reno. At the time of the flight, he had 2-inch long gray hair and he wore a mask. The surveillance footage shows a man with a military-style buzz cut wearing no mask and carrying several items. So it wasn't even a close call. They just got the wrong guy. Despite the discrepancies in their appearance, American Airlines identified this man as the shoplifter seen in the footage. Based on that information, police issued 2 arrest warrants for the man, one for felony burglary of a building and the second for criminal mischief. And they often classify these as different things in different states. You might say, why isn't that shoplifting? Well, that might be one of the ways that they couch this as a form of shoplifting. It'd be burglary of a building because it happened in a building and you stole something there if you were, in fact, the person who did this. So over a year later, unaware of any of the events with American Airlines, the man was in Tucumcari, New Mexico, with his dogs visiting friends. He's at a 4th of July party, and someone called the police over a disturbance. When police got there, they took the information of every single person there. When they got this man's name, it kicked out outstanding warrants in Texas. So they arrested him. Now he was confused. He did not know where Tarrant County was or the last time he'd been in Texas. No one would tell him what the warrants accused him of doing. So he was convinced that this was a mistake of some sort. He'd be vindicated. So he told his friends that they shouldn't worry. It would all get cleared up quickly, and of course he was wrong. He was taken to the county jail where he continued to insist that they had arrested the wrong person. But his protestations were not merely falling on deaf ears, but appeared to be antagonizing the jailers. The jailers apparently got fed up with his nonsense. He was strip searched, put into general population, housed alongside people accused of violent crimes. And of course, aside from the fear of physical abuse, is the risk of catching COVID-19. The facility's contempt for the health, safety, and well-being of its inmates was immediately obvious, according to the lawsuit. At the time, New Mexico had the 10th highest death rate from COVID in the country. This county jail is one of the 3 jails in New Mexico where corrections officers had refused to be tested for COVID-19. For the next 17 days, the man is traumatized repeatedly by the conditions at the jail. He slept on a concrete floor, did not get much rest due to his constant state of confusion and fear, confrontation. The suit describes the violent outbursts in the packed unit that arose over any trivial act. It says he saw a young man punched in the face. There's blood on the walls, and he had to sit there in silence and not help a fellow human being because he was scared of what might happen to him. Another man got ill, and they had to plead for medical attention. After he'd been in the jail for 8 days, he was taken to a local judge. He still received no information about why he was there. The judge told him his only options were to waive extradition, in which New Mexico would deliver him to Texas, or wait for Texas, in essence, to come pick him up. So, unsure what he should do, he waived extradition. But then he was sent back to jail. After the court appearance, his suffering became most acute as his detention appeared to be without any end in sight. Still did not know why he'd been arrested. On the 17th day in jail, officers came and told him he's being released. He grabbed the clothes he had arrived in and was sent out of the jail without any information about why he'd been there in the first place. He walked to a McDonald's where he's hoping he could clean himself up, but they kicked him out because, of course, they assumed that he was just some homeless person off the street. He got on a bus to get back home, but the bus broke down halfway there. Took him 2 days to get home, and he finally did get there. So after returning home, he started to try and figure out why he'd been put through all this. He called various county authorities and finally reached a detective at the DFW Airport Police Department, and they're the ones who told him what the charges were, but still could not explain why he'd been misidentified. But the detective said, by the way, you missed another court date. So there's now another warrant out for your arrest because you've missed another court date. So he tried to explain to the detective that he's innocent, but the detective wouldn't really give him anything about that. So the call ended with the detective admonishing him for not going to his court hearing. He then found an attorney. After spending weeks looking for one he could afford, he retained the attorney that he now has. And they contacted DFW Airport Police, and when they compared photos of the client to the surveillance footage, they said, oh, it's the wrong guy. It's the wrong guy. After police compared the photos, the DA dismissed all charges. They dismissed all charges. So even though the charges against him were dropped, his life, of course, has not been the same. And he says that he's been shaken to the core because of what happened. And so he's afraid of people accusing him of things he did not do. And he now suffers an ongoing state of hypervigilance that has robbed him of his ability to rest or relax. And this is one of those things. I know some people are going to say, Steve, guy got arrested, spent 17 days in jail, but he's out now. How bad could that be? Well, first of all, if you were grabbed randomly and forced to go sit in a jail cell for 17 days, the entire time not knowing why you're there, what you're accused of, that actually is the definition of Kafkaesque. If you actually look at the story, the trial by Kafka, that's actually one of the elements that makes that story so terrifying, is that the man at the center of it is accused of having committed a crime, but they won't tell him what he did. Just the longer it goes on, the mystery builds. What did he do? What is he accused of? Who's accusing him? And so this guy's sitting in jail for 17 days. I know people have spent years in jail for things they didn't do. I understand that. But here it's 17 days, and they've never told him what he's accused of, and he's never been brought to court until they bring him to court and say, do you want to fight extradition? And they still won't tell him what the charges are in the other state. That is Kafkaesque. And so what would that be worth to you or me? I'll tell you right now, if you grab me with no warning and said, I'm going to take you and put you in a jail cell for 17 days, and I don't even care if it's a nice jail cell. That's still an expensive trip, my friends. 17 days especially when they got the wrong person, and especially when they won't tell him what he did. And so the weirder part is you think that he might be entitled to an attorney during that time. There's no mention made of that, but he should have been provided one if he couldn't afford one, who could then have said, okay, why is my client here? Because they can treat the inmates however they want to treat them. Lawyers generally get a slightly better level of treatment, and if they don't, they then know who to report it to and so on. So he says he's had substantial economic damages due to the wrongful arrest. He could not work during the time he was in jail, of course. He missed out on a tour he's supposed to give, and that's what he does for a living. He's a tour guide. The trip had to be canceled, and he had to refund the group at his own expense. Meanwhile, the arrest warrants remained active even after he was released, which meant he could not work until September of 2021 because he had to get that stuff taken care of to go out and find a job. Now, the suit accuses American Airlines of negligence for wrongly identifying him. American could have given police the list of passengers as they were asked to do, and instead they decided to conduct their own negligent investigation, his attorney says. And the attorney says, I blame American. Without American doing what they did, the detective never would have issued a warrant. It all starts with a disclosure of his name and his name only. And so it's a crazy case. And why they did this, no one knows. And so it's interesting, but someone will find this out. If the case goes into litigation and they actually get into the period, what's called discovery, they can actually, meaning this guy and his attorney, can actually ask American who at American responded to the request for information. Where is that person right now? Let's sit them down and take their deposition testimony. Put them under oath and start firing questions at them. And say, when they asked you for a manifest, you didn't send them a manifest. You sent them the list of one name. Why'd you do that? Instead of sending over the surveillance video of all the people getting on the plane, you sent them a photograph of one guy. Why'd you do that? And is it not your normal practice to send the manifest and the video? Why'd you deviate from your normal procedure? And so they can figure all this stuff out. Of course, what's likely going to happen, and I'm just playing the odds here, Americans will go, oh, that person no longer works for us. Yeah, they're gone. Yeah, we have no idea where they are. Moved to a state far, far away. Who knows? Who knows? These things happen. But good attorneys can track them down and find out. If they don't work at American anymore, they might be more truthful because they don't care about their job so much because they ain't there anymore. So we'll see. But it's a crazy, crazy case. Chris, James, and Cliff all sent it. We'll find out more what happens. I'm sure that if the case goes to trial, we'll hear about it. If it settles, hopefully we'll hear about it. But from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Kaylee Johnson wrote it, Arizona man spends 17 days in jail for a crime he didn't commit, and he blames American. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. In the end, you will talk more about the journey and not the destination.